What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a P.O. Box, and Locals, Patreon. And all of these, all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to, provide great conversations. And thank you all for your continued support. Do a lot of these duo conversations, but this is one of the ones I really look forward to every time they happen. So thank you both for coming on, and it's good to see you guys. Even though Dave, I just saw you last week, but Matt, it's really good to see you.
No, I'm happy to appear on the Mike and Dave show, which I've noticed is a more.
Who did we do last week, Mike? Remind me who we did last week. That's how blurry it's getting. For
Melody, and then Ed Dowd.
Melody, right?
And then Ed Dowd the week before that.
Dowd.
Yeah,
right. The Ed Dowd one was really good.
I thought that one went well. Sometimes you sense it, and we really dug deep into the markets are fucked up, sort of part of the competition.
Super fucked. Yeah.
Super fucked. Yeah, super fucked. And then I hosted a debate it wasn't a debate, it was a discussion between Mike Leibowitz, who I once met at a Vegas finance meeting, and Stephanie Pomboy, who I'd never talked with directly, but chat with all the time digitally. And that was fun.
I watched that one too, and there was one weird thing about that. When you asked them a question about the Strait of Hormuz, and their reactions to it were, I thought, very strange. It
was the price of oil, basically. They responded with the price of oil.
And Stephanie said, well, listen, Trump can't have, gas too high going into the midterms, so it's got to be resolved.
And I think I said, I don't think that's the way it's going to work.
To me, but explains why, these people who are seriously focused on markets, that disconnect with the risk of that Strait of Hormuz event, I think just was, that was a perfect example, a nice microcosm of the thinking that I think is why the markets there's so much risk.
I think I called them. I think I said to them at that moment, I think that might have been the moment where I said, you guys sound like economists now. Yeah. Because there was one point where they did, and I said, I think you're missing a much more important thing. Will we have oil? Will we have supplies? They say fear and greed. The big one is need. And I don't know who said that, but I picked it up from somebody. It might have been you.
No, it wasn't me, but that's a great way to put it.
I know.
But the idea that it just must be resolved, it's like very hand wavy. Well, because of the consequences, it's got to be resolved. Like that so far hasn't played out well.
Well, I was on with Jimmy Iorio, and they were talking in a similar sort of vein. And I gave them Iran has to make us suffer badly so that we don't let Israel do this to them again. Right? That I think Iran really has to take us to the mat. And at one point, one of them made reference to them being our ally, and I go, really? Are you sure about that? Because I'm not convinced they're an ally, unless you want to say, okay, Stalin was an ally in World War II, and I go, yeah, no, we were fighting a common foe, but he was not an ally by any stretch of the imagination. And
we were funding him like he was an ally, but yeah.
Enormously. People don't even know that part of the story. We gave them so many weapons and so many goods and so much money. Post-war, we funded the rise of the superstate.
This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike.
It's really crazy. We kept giving them money long after the war.
Yeah, I just knew we were arming them to a detriment of our own forces, even. Yeah, I knew that.
Well, we also gave them some estimated 10 to 20 times as many weapons as we gave Britain during the Lend-Lease. And we even had one perverse moment where we supposedly bullied Britain into giving up some of theirs to the Soviet Union. So it's a real strange story. I dug into this a couple of years ago and read a half a dozen books that were sort of the counterculture interpretation of World War II. And I've concluded that there is no sovereign state that has ever been documented to not lie.
That seems fair.
And well, but then all of a sudden, then when people say, "Well, we know this," I go, "You sure?" Right. So I get into October 7th. There's a good one. I can document with Israeli sources, exclusively Israeli sources, that there was a stand-down order. It's a trivial thing to document. Israeli press were saying something's coming, something's coming. They reported it. The Egyptians were saying, "Hey, dude, something's coming," right? And they pulled the army away. And then, as I've said, if I asked you on October 6th, Hamas drops 800 guys into Israel, how long would it take to mop them up? You'd say 10 minutes, right? One thing I'm positive is Israel would have just absolutely clobbered them. And they to run around for 8 hours unmolested and to take captives, and the story's about as straight up as Erica Kirk.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, no, it's actually, this is one of the problems that you realize more and more stuff is a lie. It actually, it's really hard to find the end of that. You know, you keep going, the rabbit holes go deeper and deeper, and it's hard to understand what is firm, like what can you hold on to as actual reality, historically speaking, especially because you talked about this with the Soviets, but also, I'm reading a book. It's very kind of distressing. It's called The Two World Wars and Hitler, and it's pretty, yeah, it's a different version of events. I mean, a completely different version of events than what I understood.
Right, that's not to say he wasn't bad.
But yeah, I haven't even gotten to the Hitler part yet.
It didn't even play, but it didn't play out the way we said. That's the key. That's the key. I'm now a Holocaust-denying Nazi by that statement alone, but that's a separate issue.
You can just go back, but the World War I also was the same. I mean, World War I had so many inconsistencies, and what in the official story I always understood, which was always a little vague in my mind, honestly, about what exactly happened and how it happened. But there are, I'm not sure I want to get into it, but yeah, there are a lot of problems with the story that you believe about it, that we've been told about it, that I got taught in school about it, the limited we did get taught.
Well, this also.
So I did.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, so this also comes to the article that you wrote a little while back, Matt, with the narrative, right? Narratives.
Tell us about that. Tell the audience about that. Tell the audience.
Well, humans need narrative. It's part of our nature. It's how we have evolved. I mean, without it, we couldn't do anything. We couldn't function as a society without like shared beliefs, a shared story about what's going on. And so it makes it a very manipulatable thing, because if you understand this about humans, you understand people's need for a story, then all you got to do is feed it to them. If you can feed to them some story that makes them feel good and is a plausible explanation, is simply explainable, then we buy into it, and like this, you could go back to the whole story of America, just in the simplicity of that story, and about individual liberty and all that. It's nice to believe, and so you just believe it. And I guess my point with it is that we are being assaulted on the narrative front big time right now. I think we probably always have been, but it certainly hasn't been as obvious. And that narratives are a way to, they're dangerous for us to fall into believing, I guess, is my big point with it. And because once you have a narrative in mind, you can almost, you try very hard to explain everything that's happening around you within that narrative framework. And you
a thing called Illyrian, a thing called I think it's called Illyrian psychology. I was thinking about it as I read your post. Illyrian psychology is this idea that that you create a personal narrative and that the memories, so many memories go right down the memory hole, which is one of the reasons why I write, so that they don't go down the memory hole. But that you remember the things that allow you to create the narrative,
that support the narrative,
fit the narrative. Yeah, and so the memories, and one point, Mike Benz, who himself is a very complicated soul, I might add, he made reference to how these kind of models are important, because that's how you can remember the facts. If you don't have a framework, the facts are just like trying to memorize a deck of cards or something. It's a different problem. But that's haunting. That's haunting. And so keep going. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's good. I just think that what I was trying to make people aware of is that we have a innate desire to grasp for a narrative, something that explains, especially as chaotic as things are now, like some simple explanation for what's actually happening. And a lot of people will bought into this idea that as Michael says, that Trump is playing 5D chess, or he's a superhero, or he's got the A-team, and they're behind the scenes, and that is a nice thing to believe in, and I understand it like that. If you believe that, it's very comforting to believe that. And there are competing narratives, or I guess offshoots of that, with the city of London is really the bad guys. With that, you have to ignore the fact that the banking establishment from the city of London sort of completely took over New York, in the early part of the 20th century, and created the Federal Reserve and all that. But like you were saying, with these narratives you tell yourself, you learn to ignore the facts or you stop seeing maybe the facts that don't support the story, and only seeing things that reinforce the story. Everywhere you look, you see evidence that the city of London is actually at it, and these narratives are dangerous because I think we're being actively manipulated on our, this one human strength, which is to, coalesce with others around ideas, around stories. So has been a human strength. It's being turned into a human weakness, or weaponized against us, I think, to make us very confused about what's actually happening. And so what I was just simply saying is, if you could just try and set aside a narrative, you're going to have one no matter what, but try and set aside and look at things objectively. Look at just simply cause and effect. This happened and that caused that to happen, and maybe the effect of what occurred is actually the story, and and it doesn't have to fit within this larger narrative arc. You don't have to have this story that Trump is taking down the city of London to explain the situation in Iran. It doesn't have to fit. It could be something totally different, and so instead of trying to make all these things fit, you're better off just looking at cause and effect and try and be objective about it. And over time, the other thing is to look at a narrative as a hypothesis.
Right.
This might be what's happening, and your efforts then are to constantly try to disprove it.
Right.
And that's just a healthier way to go, rather than looking for only reinforcing information to support your narrative.
Which is very hard to do, to get yourself not to do that. And you can watch others fall into it. I've got some suggestions here that kept popping up when I was typing. So I copy edited the Battle of Bretton Woods for Ben Steele. So I read it very carefully, and that's when the Soviet spy story first showed up, where the guy named Harry Dexter White turned out to have been he was somewhere between a Soviet sympathizer and a Soviet spy, and it's not quite clear to me. But then I asked Ben what was the best book for World War I, and he said Europe's Last Summer. And they go into the whole start of how World War I really started, and it had nothing to do with the Archduke. Just there were alliances building up, and there were power structures building up, and the age of monarchy was coming to an end. And when the Archduke got shot, the Germans had to badger the Austrians into responding, because they wanted to start the war, because they knew they would be relatively weaker if they waited. And so in many ways, the fact that we vilified Germany at the end of World War II, besides the fact everyone knows we created World War II by vilifying him after World War I, who, by the way, one of the big problem children in that was Churchill, who was a complete antagonistic, hate the Germans kind of guy. But it's not clear who really started World War II. It's just not obvious to me. And so then on the narrative story, some number of years ago, I realized I had to stop reading history and start reading about mass psychology. And so I went through this bingey period where I read Eric Hoffer's The True Believer. And if you haven't read that, it's a must read. I see you nodding, the audience should take that seriously too. Matthias Desmet's book on, I think it's something about totalitarianism.
About mass formation. Yeah.
Right. And Bernays' 1926, 28 book on propaganda. Bernays ended up becoming CIA, so there's that. And Hannah Arendt about totalitarianism. And there's one I want to recommend now that came out this week, I think, and that's this guy Chase Hughes, who's kind of an expert at how you trick the mind. He knows hypnotism, he knows propaganda, he knows this. He was on Sean Ryan's show, and it was the most comprehensive Chase Hughes interview I've ever seen. It goes for like 2.5 hours, and Ryan keeps poking at him to find out, how do they do it? And Chase goes through all the little tricks that you use to move a person's thinking over to a new context to get them to do things. He said you can. He at one point he refers to the Milgram experiment, where he said, look, in 45 minutes they got 67% of the population to actually knowingly kill a guy with electric shocks, right? And I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I knew that they knowingly kept doing it, but they knowingly killed guys, even though it was in theory a fake experiment. I'm not even convinced of that. I'm not convinced they were killing guys in the next room. And so that's worth watching, the Chase Hughes, Sean Ryan podcast.
And he has a new book coming out about that. Is that what you said?
I think he does. And then the other thing is, I'm in a Zoom group that I go to rarely now because it's kind of gotten off some pretty weird directions. But there's a guy named Stephen Coughlin who's on Twitter, and he's a former NSA analyst. He was the Pentagon's expert on radical Islam. You can imagine that being a position of some import. Well, the interesting part is no one gave a damn. He tried to warn them, you've got to learn this and this and this, and they just weren't listening. But one day we were talking about a they, which is the pronouns for the bad guys. And he said, I said, Stephen, who are they? And he said, well, I don't like to name names because once I do, you think you understand. And I took that much deeper and further than that simple statement. And I said, never draw a conclusion that gets you to stop thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I reject, well, obvious things like when someone says conspiracy theorists, I go, bite me, you're a moron, right? But subtler things like the uniparty is a great way of sort of throwing up your hands and saying, I'm done. It's just one party. I go, no, they might be very similar and they might be both duping us, but you're watching some sort of professional wrestling match, and you have to understand that there are two sides to this, and that Hulk Hogan is one side, and and the thing's rigged. But there's a reason why there are apparently two teams, and so I don't like the uniparty dismissal.
But is there two teams though, Dave? I mean, when I hear that, I
there's
don't
two
see
wrestlers in professional wrestling.
Yeah, but this isn't professional. But it's not professional wrestling.
Well, it is. Yeah, it is though. It is. That's the problem. That's my point. It is professional wrestling. It's just kayfabe. But the trick is to understand how the kayfabe works. And I think it was Eric Weinstein. He wrote an article in 2013 on how politics is kayfabe. And what you have to do is you have to understand how elaborate and fancy a professional wrestling match is, and how they're moving the audience and getting viewership and stuff. And it gets back to Chase Hughes and things like that. How do you manipulate the thought processes? So yes, the two the two teams at the end are going to go out and drink beer and have really the same goal. But you still have to understand what you think you're seeing.
So how does Massey fit into that?
He seems sort of 80% legit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean by that? But
Yeah.
there's a 20% where he could have named some names and didn't. There's little tiny bits of things that you get the feeling he didn't call everything out. He got in to see the unredacted Epstein files and came out with names that we already knew. And so there's a little bit of concern there. But the critical story of Massey was, if Massey had won the nomination, Israel still won. And the reason is because if you could beat the tar out of a guy like that, who sort of people who really think of themselves as conservative thinkers and anti-war and stuff like that, if you can beat a guy, even if he didn't lose, no one else would dare go against that. And so the fact that he lost is disturbing, not because he was necessarily legit, but because it really did show the awesome power of something. I think the actual election was rigged, actually, the more I thought about it.
It kind of looks like it with the mail-in ballots, just over 10,000, just enough. And I must confess, I didn't think much about it. I didn't think about it until after he lost. And I go, holy shit. Of course they rigged it.
They showed, Emily Jashinsky did it was a clip on YouTube. I don't know if she works for Megyn Kelly, but she's one of those, younger journalists. And she was doing a breakdown of the dollars that went to, Galleran versus Massey. And it was like the small dollar donations, upwards of $20. Massey got I forget now, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but he got a tremendous amount of smaller donations where Galleran got next to nothing. And all the big money came to Galleran and not to Massey. From these huge super PACs.
I don't understand how money buys votes. I'm having trouble with that. I'm sitting there watching this, and the fact that Galleran got so much money would get me to vote against him, not for him. So I'm having trouble understanding how they bought away the electorate.
It does seem more like election fraud, honestly, when you look at the numbers, because you realize, how strongly Massey had previously won in his own district. It just seemed with all the urgency of him, maybe being taken out, more people would participate in it, and to turn it as far as it did,
fewer people voted.
Being so important.
Fewer people voted for Massey this time than in his previous run, where he was essentially uncontested. And this one should have gotten the voters to the polls, right? This one really should. So if Massey had gotten a huge number of votes and Galleran had gotten more, you say, that voter fraud with Biden thing, that F logo, you'd still worry about it. But this one made no mathematical sense. So, but I hadn't thought about it until afterwards.
Yeah, from the kayfabe perspective, it does set Massey up for greater things in a way.
Could be.
Because he said in his concession speech, that he never set out to create a movement, but that's what emerged around his election campaign.
Mm-hmm. And we saw Trump come back, right?
Yeah. You need the people love champions.
I love the superheroes.
Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team.
Yep.
And he does look like a folk hero after all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Mangione.
Exactly.
So we don't know. There could be so many more layers to these onions, and the whole thing could be totally kayfabe. Totally kayfabe. Massey looked like a non-kayfabe, but you need your hero. So I say, okay, give him a hero. But
right.
Did you mute, Dave? Matt, can you hear him? Matt, you there?
Yeah, just show
audio.
people
The audio. Hold on, the audio went out for a second. Dave, what'd you just say?
Say that again.
Yeah, coincidence. I don't think Israel won. They generated anti-Semitism, which is not fair to the standard Jews of the world, but certainly anti-Israel and certainly anti-AIPAC. So AIPAC is right up there with, the kill shot, the jab, right? AIPAC, Fauci, they're all right at the top of the heap of we don't like you anymore groups.
Yep. Went specifically out there and overturned the will of the people, and because he made some criticisms or pointed out things that he shouldn't have. I mean, that's what it looks like. That's the story that comes out of it.
I know. But the other story for Israel is don't mess with us. So it could be that Israel doesn't care about its image at all.
Well, that seems pretty clear at this point, doesn't it?
Well, I would have thought they would, right? Because they have tried to play the violin card, and that they're going to nuke us any day now card. And so they seemed as though they were trying to generate support.
Yeah,
from the
meanwhile,
masses.
at the same time, like pushing 1 million people out of Lebanon, as they go into bombing.
Pushing. There's a term for it. Pushing. Yeah, pushing. Yeah. With bullets in the back of their heads. Right. Pushing.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it really looks bad over there.
Yeah, I feel like they've given up the PR efforts, and now it's more direct attacks and censorship instead. It's more effective.
Charlie Kirk time.
Well,
right.
Yeah.
As we're starting to talk about this, we've talked, Matt, when you and I spoke back in February, and coming back to the narratives, I have not seen anything yet to disprove the theory that you discussed at our conversation when the war started, Matt. And to me, on the broader like where this is going, I think it's very clear the trajectory that we're on. Do you feel any differently about?
Clarify what that is, since the audience won't know what you're talking about. I think what we talked about before, they might not.
Matt, what did you think at the start of the war, when this started, where it was going?
Well, I felt like that the vibe, the feeling I had is that was a pre-COVID awakening moment. Before. So once if you were paying attention, you were aware that COVID was there and it was simmering, and the narrative around that was building, but the general public had not awoken to the risks of it yet, and the markets hadn't responded at all to it yet. So there was this weird period where you could see it coming. You could see it spreading around the world. There's like around that time in my imagination was when they surrounded some Italian cities with military and were like keeping them isolated, quarantined physically with troops. And so at that point, the market in the U.S. hadn't woken up to it, and people weren't generally aware that this was this thing that was coming. That's the way it felt then, and for the most part, in many ways, it still feels the same now, where people are kind of. We haven't yet been confronted with the physical reality of the shortages that are coming due to the Strait of Hormuz, mostly because we've been, the U.S. was in a great position with oil inventories and the strategic petroleum reserves, which have been, those inventories have been getting crushed lately. But eventually that physical reality of shortages is going to hit everything, and there's going to be a moment, I think, where the market has a freak out moment, just like it had in March of 2020 with COVID. It was like, not a problem. Oh my God, this is a problem. And so I imagine that moment is coming, and all of a sudden Americans, remember, nobody was concerned at all about COVID, and then there was a period over about 10 days where it became the thing that everyone was concerned about. Maybe people didn't know exactly what to think of it, but it was a water cool talking point. I mean, everybody was talking about it. And I think the Strait of Hormuz thing has been able to simmer in the background still, and eventually people wake up to it. So I felt like that time period was the same, where something is coming, like and a bomb has been exploded, but you're waiting on the shockwave still. And so that's one point of it. The second point is that if you're in that period, in that COVID era, I couldn't come out of that thinking anything other than we were under attack by the entire thing, that it was an attack on Americans, on us, and maybe everyone across the world. But this seems to me to be the same thing. I don't think that, I think this is all narrative, I understand. But if you're really trying to break things, I know it's narrative, but it's a hypothesis. But it's a hypothesis.
We're all stuck with narratives. We're stuck with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to try and explain anything, we have to come up with the story. And Doug Casey, who I do this podcast with, talked about the pre-COVID times as the before times. He still calls it the before times, and that everything is different after that. And I think that's totally true. I think everything is still different from COVID, but I think we're now living in a new before times also, where as soon as this thing really starts to affect physical reality, which it's coming, we will look back on these times as if they, like how nice it was, how different it was. So, and from the conspiracy framework, it's like if you wanted to actually, let's say, like accomplish your net zero targets, for instance, it's really hard to get people to voluntarily sacrifice their standard of living. But in this way, it's kind of an evil genius. If you close the Strait of Hormuz, you can force it through. You can force the adoption of these standards that they've been pushing on us for decades. And so I think that's coming. And I think there will, we've seen like a trivial amount of flights canceled. I think there'll be a lot more of that. I think that, we've seen now the motor oil shortage, which has been clear that's a real thing. It's going to fester into all parts of the economy because the supply chains around these petrochemicals are so massive and so involved in everything. It's going to change things for people, and I don't think people are ready for it yet.
How many pieces of a Ford F-150 can you do without? Right? That's the problem.
Few. Very few. Yeah.
So all you need someone's coming.
Are you surprised that it's you okay, Dave? You good?
Yeah, my dog just spotted something outdoors.
Are you surprised it's taken this long, Matt? Like that still hasn't, where you think this is going, that it hasn't happened yet?
My intuition is what made me think that we were at that cliff's edge at that point. But when you look at the numbers, it's definitely explainable by all of the inventories in the pipeline, by everything, that we had to work our way through before we'd experience real shortages. So, it does make sense. It does seem quite logical that it has taken this long, actually. But if you just, what was it like, what was oil inventories? I can't remember the specific numbers, but anyway, down massively week over week. Each of the last, several weeks for the last, 10 weeks almost. So we're going to hit that wall. People talk of tank bottoms. Some of the more sophisticated, intelligent people on the topic talk about that, and I think we're gonna hit that relatively soon. I don't know when exactly it'll happen or in what way you'll experience those shortages. I mean, it'll probably pop up in weird and unexpected places, like that motor oil shortage. No one really thought of that. No one really realized that was all coming out of one major supplier out of the Middle East. We didn't. Who could have known? And I think we're going to see things like that pop up, and it's going to be really inconvenient, if nothing else.
Is the motor oil the new toilet paper, potentially?
I mean, if you saw that motor oil shortage and you didn't go and stock up on a little, so for an oil change or two, I think you're making a mistake. So yeah, you should be stockpiling on that.
So I went through this on Y2K, and I realized that Y2K was just the same grift. And it took me years to realize it because I wasn't yet ready to accept that world. And so there was a guy named Yeager who said, look, we're going to have a real problem with these computers and the COBOL programming. And he was out there beating the drum, and you had a Wall Street economist, famous guy. Oh, God, he's never gone bearish again. In any event, he got sucked in pretty good, I think. Put it this way, he acted sucked in. And I've told computer guys, I said the whole thing was a grift. They go, no, we fixed it. And I said, no, we didn't, because if we had fixed it, there would be brush fires breaking out all over the world in Portugal and Argentina.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. No, there were no brush fires. I was looking for them to try to save my soul from having gotten duped. It was really just a great way to sell software and hardware. Yardeni was the economist.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a site called Timebound 2000, which was the primary chat board for the Y2K. And there was a guy named Dexter there. And Dexter was really interesting. Dexter knew everything about everything. And anytime someone would say some chip would fail, Dexter would say, no, it won't because of blah, blah, blah. Dexter never engaged in conversation. So Dexter was a panel of guys fielding questions, trying to keep the fire to low burn, right? To keep people from getting crazy. And then the second the clock turned over, Dexter disappeared. Obviously got assigned to a new task, and Dexter was not just one guy. His knowledge was too broadly based, and so I learned something from that one. Then, but I also worked through the details of supply chains, because I started thinking about if you can't get X, if you can't get Y, and so when COVID showed up, boom, hit me like a truck. The second I realized, at one point we were planning recruiting dinners, recruiting visitations for the weekend for grad students to try to recruit them to come. We had to decide whether to cancel it or not, or to go to Zoom, which was sort of an appallingly mediocre substitute. And we made the decision to call it, and we weren't sure. Within 7 days, it was so obvious that was the only call we could make. And at one point, I tweeted something to the effect, nobody wants to, they're canceling all the meetings. No one wants to hold the meeting of death. And it turns out my tweet made it into the biomedical journal Stats.
Oops.
Yeah, well, that's fine. But the supply chain problem hit me like a truck the second time, and now you're talking about a third time, right? Is there any doubt in your skull, there's other skulls out there, but is there any doubt in your skull that we have an unavoidable problem heading straight at us?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think there's, even if the Strait opened today,
right?
The pipeline has been utilized.
Right.
So it's going to cause problems. Now they would be not necessarily cataclysmic. It would just be for a period of months, as things get put back together. But in my mind, there's no, the motivation to open the Strait of Hormuz seems awfully low. And, one of the biggest things to me is that there was this point when the ceasefire was announced that it was a major de-escalation opportunity that was presented, and Iran, although charging a fee, started to allow the Strait to reopen, and Trump announced, no, we're going to blockade Iran now. He was going to shut down the Strait, and so it was like that was their chance to, if you really wanted a resolution, if you were concerned about the global economy or the American economy, then you would back off at that point. You would have allowed the ships to flow. But because that blockade was called, and then I just think that the motivation to keep it closed is there.
So what's the motivation? What's the big game here?
I think that someone's at war with us, just like during COVID. I mean, that's what I believe. I think that they're trying to change the nature of a lot of things, of society, of our relationship with our government. Are they at war?
So it's the elites at war with the people, then?
Yeah.
To use a general term.
And I don't know who they is exactly, just like during COVID.
I don't either.
Like, pin it on the bad guy. I'm not sure. There was, obviously a lot of people were bought into it, either in on it or, incentivized to go along with it. But that was clearly a war on the people. That's the only way I could take that. And I just think, why would, if you believe that, that was true then I've been looking for that to appear again, something like that. And if you believe, as I think that the elites believe, that this net zero thing is actually the way to go. I don't think their motivations are the same. I don't think it's really to save because of climate change or some nonsense. But that was a war on people, but it was a softer war because it was trying to sell people into their own demise instead of force them into it. This is a perfect way to get there. This accomplishes those goals. Essentially, it forces behaviors, which we know that, like the WEF has talked about this, that you need to change the behaviors of the public and their consuming patterns, and this will force it. This will just make it economically impossible for people to live in the same way that they were living before, if it continues, especially.
So Chase Hughes said something in this podcast I pushed that you hit upon, and that is, you talked about how COVID showed up, and then there was this quiet period where people were not taking it seriously, and then it hit harder. And he talks about the notion of two hits in that podcast. And I once in a podcast called it the bike helmet model. The first hit breaks the helmet, the second hit breaks your skull. And so there's something psychological about first introducing the idea and then letting it simmer and then hitting you with it. And I remember in March-ish, February-ish of COVID, screaming at the top of my lungs on Twitter, why aren't the markets responding to this? And then they did. Now, there's a Marxist economist named Beege, I think it's pronounced, who actually came up with a theory that I find pretty provocative, and that is that in late 2019, the markets were acting erratic. The repo market in particular was profoundly erratic, right? It was crazy erratic. And his theory was that they actually used COVID to put the markets into an induced coma, which they could then hide their $8 to $10 trillion worth of bailout of the banking system behind it. And so and then when we came out of COVID, we had an excuse for troubles, and B, had an excuse for having shot huge amounts of liquidity into the system.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. The thing that I have the problem with that simple explanation is that there was so much actual physical harm done to so many people that did not need to be done in order to do the banking part.
Well, so I've been wondering if what we witnessed in COVID was the consequence of the true believer, where what we did is we unleashed a bunch of micro tyrants on the world. So you're the mayor of a town of 40,000, but you now get to make big calls like you can't use the parks. I had a funny exchange where I had a dog off leash one day, and some lady bitched about it being off leash, and I said, well, I think of the leash laws as kind of a guideline. And she bitched at me, and I said, by the way, where's your fucking mask? So I think the micro tyrants did a lot of the heavy lifting. The people who shut down the beaches, and no one told them they had to do that. They might have kind of gotten that message, but there was a lot of decisions made about restaurants. By the way, one of the consequences, so big money was behind COVID beating the shit out of people. And what it did is it moved a huge percentage of the economy that was in the super micro cap world of mom and pop, and they moved it into the S&P. So now you don't go to Linda's Diner, you go to Chipotle. You don't go to that little hardware store on the corner. You go to Lowe's, or you go to Home Depot. And so the S&P got a huge bonus because it took a higher percentage of the total economy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so it was a hostile takeover.
But in a way, like, I see the destructive element of that. It's destroying the people who are independent, who don't have to, go along to get along, So by those the independent.
I think it's terribly destructive. Yeah, I think it's terribly destructive. I didn't mean to imply that it wasn't destructive as hell.
But what I'm saying is,
Bezos won.
He did, but I think that some of the goal was to destroy, not just that was because again, then you get into the vaccines. And that was a top-down thing.
Right.
not just
a tremendous amount of lying going on there. Well, tremendous amount. And
this is the question that I have with all this. You know, when I hear this, Trump is taking on the elites, and nobody can, I mean, I've not heard an answer. How did 2020 factor into he's taking on the cabal now? He's destroying the city of London. Because who was in charge then and who is in charge now? That's my question.
Yeah, and you know, I think, you know, if you think it's going back to the kayfabe point of view on it all, Trump's playing a role. And I think that, you know, his role during his first term and his second term are different. He's behaving differently in it. And I mean, you know, he had to have some plausible deniability for his second term to even be a possibility. And I don't think he was.
So he negotiated the second term.
It certainly seems like it. I mean, negotiating a deal, for instance, that says the IRS is going to create a $1.776 billion slush fund, or the Treasury is, for you and your allies who have been victims of lawfare in the past, and you will no longer, you have blanket immunity with the IRS, you and your family, from now on. I mean, that's that sounds like a deal. That sounds like a deal. And maybe that's a deal to not go into the Epstein stuff. I don't know. But it sounds like a deal. Doesn't it? I mean...
Oh, he made tons of deals. I think that's true. In fact, I think you could see the deals getting made by the change in the momentum in the 2024 election, where as we got closer and closer to the election, you could see that Harris was not going to win. And you could see that the forces lining up behind Trump. So they had either given up on stopping him, or he had cut the deals necessary for them to find. And it's also possible, by the way, that Harris was never intended to win.
Right, exactly. Put up a candidate who doesn't stand a chance. I mean, anyway.
Two different ones.
Exactly, yeah. One that might be, which was worse? It's hard to say. But then also you see all the tech bros coming out one after another and supporting Trump during that time period you're talking about. You know, so you see that sea change of support from people that were against him before that. So yeah, I think some deal was made.
Mm-hmm.
Especially
I think Biden was worse. I'll tell you why. Biden was showing dementia in 2019 before he got elected. So for a major political party to put a demented person on a ticket, a truly demented person, not just one who's getting more demented, which we have now, but a guy who demonstrably had to be protected on the ticket in 2024 is just inexcusable. Harris, by the way, there is evidence that Harris is a Manchurian candidate.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that before.
Yeah.
But I mean, here's the thing: is if it's kayfabe anyway, and I don't
doesn't matter.
Biden wasn't really the president. He wasn't really, doing presidential duties. It was done by whoever in the background.
President Autopen.
Exactly. Right, which is also not going to be prosecuted. I mean, all these things.
Nope.
All of the crimes of the past are basically being paved over.
I've done podcasts where they said that they are going to get the bad guys. It's just taking time. And I said, wake me up when you get one.
Well, yeah. And I mean, we could see how the Justice Department can work when they target people, because we saw it after January 6th, where they were super aggressive. They weren't worried about the consequences of building the very complicated case over many years, in order to bring it so it didn't get thrown out. I mean, they just
buried him.
Targeted them and crushed them.
Right. I thought the post-January 6th Justice Department was arguably the most treasonous thing I could think of in the history of the United States.
Yeah,
maybe you blame the South for secession. Maybe you want to go there. Who knows? But, to me, it was profoundly treasonous.
And scary. I mean, it was legitimately
very scary.
Yeah.
Very scary. And they'll do it again.
Right. When they decide to use the Justice Department, when they want to weaponize it, it will be weaponized. and you can see it's not being weaponized against all the crimes that have been committed against the population so far, and I don't see that changing.
So if you read Jonathan Turley now has 2 books. I'm stunned he only has 2. I would have said this guy was one of these. I've got a dozen books over my career.
I think.
And the first one was The Indispensable Right. And our civil liberties really have been challenged in a profound way on a number of occasions. And what spooked me a little bit is that he sounded like he wasn't sure we were going to pull out of this one. Then the other one is Rage in the Republic, which really focuses on the anger levels. Now, Turley came to Cornell, and here's a shocking stat for you. He came to Cornell to give a talk at the law school. And what I want to say is there was not a single law student in the audience. Now, that's a stretch, because it turns out there was one who happens to be the son of a New York State Supreme Court justice who's a friend of mine, and he dragged him to it.
Why is that, do you think?
I talked to a computer scientist about this too. We can't really come up with good answers, but to me, Turley would be like if you brought the Pope to town and there were no Catholics. And I asked him a couple of questions. One interesting one, I asked him if he was anywhere near the Supreme Court, and he said the appointments are getting younger and I'm getting older, so no. And but I asked him if I said, you wrote a ton about the George Floyd riots and the death of George Floyd, and I read everything. I told him, I said, I'm the closest thing to a groupie you have, and I said, did Derek Chauvin get a fair trial? And he stammered a bit, and he said, I have real problems with that trial. I had terrible problems with that trial. He was never going to get and it wasn't jury nullification. There was not a single person in the courtroom who wanted him to get acquitted, including his defense team.
Right, he needed to go.
He was sacrificed. He was sacrificed. And the fact he's still alive is extraordinary, actually. So we do have real problems here. And I think it's possible the digital world is going to make it impossible to shake them.
Why the digital world? Why do you think
because I think it's more invasive than anything else. I think guys with guns can be fought with guns. I don't know how you fight the digital world. So again, I'm not a Bitcoin guy, but I do understand the logic of autonomy, which I do not believe Bitcoin has now. Let's start with that. But I do understand why it was appealing. And they can debank you. They do debank people. How do you function in a world in which you've been debanked? You can't even. Let's say you get a hard copy paycheck. Where do you deposit it? Where do you cash it? Right? They won't let you take cash for it. So because that's some sort of money laundering flag that goes up the pole, right? So you get debanked. It's the equivalent of. And Chase Hughes talks about this too. In a tribe of 120 people, which is sort of the most you can deal with, he said, your risk is getting kicked out of the tribe. And that meant death. So if you got banned, you were dead. You didn't survive. And so we evolved to really care what the people around us think. And what they think of us and how to stay on people's good side. And I've made arguments like there was a show about the 1720 Hudson Bay, and some guy was a total dick. Powerful guy was a total dick. And I'm going, this is not realistic. Because in those days up in Hudson Bay, if you're a dick, you're going to walk around some corner, some guy's going to club you over the head. You're done. So right. you have to learn how to get along to stay alive.
And that's no longer at all the factor in modern society.
That's right.
Everything is based upon efficiency of transactions. It's a transactional economy, transactional society, for that matter, at this point. And so you're right. If you cut people out of their ability to engage in transactions you effectively completely cut them out of society.
Mm-hmm. And it really would be potentially a fatality, right? You would die of some disease because you couldn't pay your bills and that sort of thing. So I think it's possible when the internet went live, we charted a course to authoritarianism. I think it might have been like when we learned to split an atom, that bad things were coming.
That's an interesting take.
The other question I have is: do you think there's a eugenics theme going on here, a serious one, where they're trying to thin the global population down by factor of 2 or 10 or something like that? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I mean, this is what Club of Rome talks about. This is like,
I know.
This is there's a history of talking about the population size as a problem, and the truth is, without the Green Revolution, this population is not supportable. Without all of the fertilizers and to keep the ag production where it is. And now a lot of that's been cut off, and so the consequences of that are naturally going to cause hardship, if not like mass death. Yeah.
And then this Deagle report?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, maybe he's off by 2 years, but
I know. What is the Deagle report?
Yeah, I can never get a decent answer to that. I had a friend of mine, older guy who's ex-CIA, and is legitimately ex-CIA. You always wonder about that, but I know this guy is.
X has always got a question mark after it, right?
Yeah, I wondered with this guy for a long time, but I'm convinced at this point. But he, he did some digging, and he said there was because supposedly this Deagle was a West Point grad, so was this CIA guy. And he did some digging, and he's like, there was a guy, his last name was spelled differently than that, though. He said it was a class ahead of him at West Point, and could have been the guy. But then since that report was in particular we're talking about was published, he died. So he died.
Someone could have taken it over too, though.
Yeah. So
he presumably had a staff to compile the Deagle report.
Yep. But I chased that down as far as I could within all my resources to try and figure out if it was legit. And the guy, my friend, thought it was, a legitimate publication, that it was real. He thought that the guy behind it may be the guy that he had as an acquaintance, but couldn't confirm either one of those things.
So I asked Michael Yan on Mike's podcast here, and Michael Yan also gave a similar I don't know. But for the audience wondering why we're talking about something that rhymes with Beagle, the Deagle report, very matter-of-factly, without explanation, has projected world populations. And all of a sudden, I think it was 2025, the population basically cut in half.
Collapses.
Without explanation. Without saying, and this is why it's going to happen. And there it is, just in a table.
No
the rest of the things got no nothing. Just flat out, half you are going to die. This is like, who's the guy who predicted? I can't remember. Predict water when, not both. So that's a strange one.
It is a strange one, but you could, once you realize how critical energy is to everything, and you see this act of destruction that's happening at the Strait of Hormuz, at the same time, Ukraine is aggressively targeting Russian facilities. Again, this is
fires around the world in various facilities.
Yeah, it does look like an act of wanton destruction. Certainly, engineered destruction. Maybe as the goal, maybe just as the consequence. But the results will be the same. It'll have a dramatic effect on the way we live, and it's coming.
While simultaneously, it appears as though the climate change story is going to just vaporize, to me.
It seems like it's gone. Yeah, it does. I think that people are exhausted with the idea. Even the real supporters of the idea are exhausted with it. But we're replacing it with something that's way more tangible. Real shortages. Like, why stick with
but also the climate change all of a sudden got in the way of AI, right?
Well, it did that. It did that. But I don't think that the fundamental goals behind the whole thing, which is to get humans to take less. I mean, this whole AI thing with the data centers is really about the problem. Humans are taking too much of the energy
Right.
supply of the electrical grid. I mean, it's really getting in the way of these data centers, for example.
Right. You saw the Lake Tahoe crowd was told that they would no longer have electricity a year from now.
Yeah, I never saw if there's an alternative source for them or not.
That's
didn't hear
what
more
I
about that
can't
story.
find either. Right. I can't figure out if it's just a matter of, okay, we'll go with, NICEAG or whatever, or are they really being cut out? And then there's the, right now I saw this guy, Tony Heller, say that we're something like 6 months from Lake Mead hitting, the bottom of the reservoir where the turbine shut off.
Yeah.
Which, to the best of my knowledge, means that you're not going to be getting a lot of hotel rooms in Vegas, and places like that.
He was talking about that. Excuse me.
Who?
Tony was talking about that on my show. In relation.
Tony was on your show. How did I miss that? When was that?
You weren't
2 weeks ago?
co-hosting that day, Dave.
There is a battle for the eyeballs. The battle for the eyeballs is intense. So.
Well, but he was saying, because we were talking about Phoenix, because he went to school down here, and then talking about Vegas, and I had said, because I have family in Vegas, and I said Vegas, he said Phoenix felt was a little better position. There's enough water, but it's going to come down to the agriculture versus the development, the city. A long-term lawsuit to figure out, figure that out. And I said, well, my guess is the city would win, the development would win that over the agriculture. But in Vegas, he talked about
and then they won't have food.
Right. Yeah. You have to get your lettuce.
Feed people.
What's the cost of the lettuce? You won't be able to get it from Yuma. You'll have to get it from Central America or wherever the alternative is. But then Vegas, I said, is double whammied because they have the water problem and the gaming is all changed. Young people don't want to go to Vegas anymore. They can't afford it, and they do everything on their phones. They can bet on everything on their phones, and every city has casinos.
Vegas. Last time I was in Vegas, I was at a meeting, and I was talking to a cab driver, and he said Vegas is really much now more about entertainment, less about gambling. Now, whether that's a ditch effort like to save a mall, right? The malls are all dying, right? And so you can say there could be some last-minute effort to try to save Vegas's main industry. Prostitution's probably still being around for a while.
Yeah, but that's not legal. Technically, it's not legal. That's not legal, and that's not legal.
They'll legalize it.
Well, but you don't even, you got all this web stuff today where you don't even need that. I mean, so the idea of Las Vegas, it's just to me, I mean, it's the old way. Everything's changed, and so the gambling, that city thrives on gaming. That's all they have. They can bring every pro sports team in there. That's not gonna move the needle. Restaurants aren't gonna move the needle.
No.
You got to get the gambling, and the Asian population. That used to be a huge thing. People from Asia would come, the high rollers. I don't know how relevant that is, especially with like what you guys are talking about.
I think they're going to Dubai and places like that, which, by the way, might not have water soon too. So there's that. And as I said in our last co-hosted podcast, we're just going to cut off your air conditioning, Mike. That'll be for the good of the planet.
I mean, you do live in a place that's like Dubai, and
I know.
it doesn't support life whatsoever, and there's no reason, I mean,
I know.
You live in like an aquarium.
A terrarium.
Yeah, it's a terrarium, but it's the same thing. It's the life support system is very fragile. You're in a spaceship. You're 1,000 feet underwater.
3.0. Biosphere 3.0.
This is it. This is my last hurrah here. This is it. No matter what.
You're going to have to move up to New Hampshire or something. Did you see the stories, which I didn't see get legs, so I'm not sure if I believe them, that after Iran started hitting some of the U.S. and surrounding Arab bases, that all of a sudden they exited a drought?
Yes, I did see that, and that's very interesting. Now you have to this whole weather modification.
But I haven't seen any more about it. I haven't seen any more about it, though. But all of a sudden, it was raining in Iran, and the theory being, of course, that someone was seeding the clouds that would get to Iran, but they were draining them to prevent Iran from getting.
And you remember
the
we
rain.
saw some massive floods in Dubai because of that. So
Right.
there were several times when they don't have a stormwater system to handle it, and so you'd see cars floating down the street. So
if you had to bet a paycheck, would you bet that Iran ends up taking out desalination plants?
I think if things resume, well, they said they would. So would I bet on it? It's such a,
Who needs nukes? Who needs nukes if you can do that?
It's the nuclear option. And, there's no going back from it if you did it. So I would think that they would still hesitate to do that. I think they would still hold back.
Here's the question too. Will this resume?
Yes.
And expand?
So.
It's all it can do. I think that the U.S. has determined that now if you're the Iranians now, like they must believe now that they need a nuke. If they weren't sure before, I think that they must think so now. And so the Ayatollah came out this morning and said, we will not surrender our stockpiles to a third country or anything else as part of this negotiation. That's a red line for us. And why is that? It's because I think that they realize they do need to build one. And so the U.S. and the Israelis think we got to go get it. We must go get that. And so I think that's where we are.
Our narrative is that we've taken out all their military capabilities, and I don't believe it for a minute.
No, I think that's an absurd claim. I mean, if the U.S. had the advantage and it was still working, we would not have a ceasefire. We think the ceasefire works for us, which is why we're doing it. If we had the upper hand in battle and we'd really had them on the ropes like that,
we'd step on them.
We'd step on their throats for sure. I mean,
with our allies.
Our allies, our greatest ally, leading the way.
Our greatest ally. Yeah, I uncorked on the greatest ally theory a couple days ago. I said, really? You sure?
Do you guys think, though, I mean, outside of the Middle East, I had Michael Yon and Matt Bracken on yesterday, and they brought up a point of, BASF, how, are they surprised that has not been destroyed yet in Europe, in Germany? Do you see this expanding?
Well,
go ahead, Matt.
I was just say, when the certain people own certain things, they don't seem to be destroyed in war. This was certainly true during World War I and World War II. Certain things seem to survive. I don't know how or why. It doesn't make sense in wartime efforts, but certain industrial capacities exist.
Yeah.
BASF
World War
is a
II,
good example.
There were places in Germany that were totally left alone.
While other cities were razed completely. Yes.
And in Japan, of course, Nagasaki and Hiroshima were left untouched until that fateful moment where they were touched.
Right.
So it was clear that they were leaving those as a case study in nuclear warfare.
Mm.
Right? You wouldn't want to drop a nuke on Dresden, right? Because it was already scorched.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And not to mention, you don't nuke Caucasians, you nuke people who are of another racial divide altogether. So during the great financial crisis, when they threw the guys from Galleon in jail, I said, and they got a xenophobic boost out of that one because they're Indians, because they didn't even have to throw a gringo in jail like Corzine or any of those guys,
Right.
Could have been put in jail easily, but they chose not to. Yeah. Should have, yeah.
Do you see this expanding then broader into Europe and then across the globe?
I think I think we're in the early stages of World War III, and I think that these moves that are being done, I don't think you can totally separate what's being done between Ukraine and Russia with what's happening now in Iran. I don't think that they're totally disconnected. So, yeah, I would expect it to expand.
So is Russia taking a beating now, or is that just propaganda, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, my opinion is that they that they are taking a beating, and that Putin has lost the initiative. He's like, he doesn't have like escalation dominance at all, and that something radical could be done to change that by him in order to regain the initiative. I mean, they cannot, all this fighting, they can't get past this certain area which Ukraine would collapse if they can, but they've been trying to basically break this belt essentially for the last couple of years, and nothing's happening. Meanwhile, Ukraine is lobbying drones into St. Petersburg and Moscow and everywhere else.
But Ukrainians, right? You got to air quote that.
Yeah, it's not the Ukrainians at all. That's a problem. I mean, this is why I worry about something on the grander scale with regards to the energy supply. There's no way that Ukraine could target these Russian oil assets without the U.S.'s support or the U.S. directly otherwise being involved in it. And while at the same time we're supposedly concerned about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and allowing waivers for Russian oil to be sold unsanctioned, we are destroying their ability to produce and distribute oil around the world. So it seems like they're trying to take down the energy. It certainly looks like it. That's my hypothesis.
So here's a narrative that I got on a couple weeks ago, and it really started bugging me. Someone posted a clip of the Shah of Iran being interviewed by Mike Wallace, and it was during the oil crisis of the 70s. And the Shah said there is no constrained flow of oil out of the Middle East. And Mike Wallace seemed really confused by that. And the Shah was basically saying your oil crisis is coming from another source.
I saw that. He was saying you'll have to talk to somebody else, like he was referring.
Yeah, exactly. Don't look to us for this problem. And then it clicked, because I vividly remember the narrative imagery of gas stations that say no gas, and of various things that were to scare people, and then they had alternate days of purchasing gas. And it sounds really bad, and they show lines of cars and stuff like that, but I'm going, but let me see if I got this right. Alternate days of gas, where I can only buy gas on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. How does that restrict the amount of gas I can get?
Right.
I'll just buy gas on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right? And so while I'm trying to get gas on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday crowd is not at the pump. So the line shouldn't be longer. So I can't see where it should have made no difference. And people say, well, it still put some constraint. I said, name it. Tell me. Right? All we know is that you know how you drive. There's people at the gas tank all the way down to empty, and then there's others when you get to a third, you say, I'm gonna fill this thing back up, right? So you do that.
So what do you think that means?
I think the oil companies engineered a 5-fold increase in the price of gas.
Why?
I think it was simple. I think it was just to crank up the I think the world was potentially awash in petroleum products, and therefore the pricing of them was not working in the favor of those who were pumping. So they needed a way to get gas at the pump up. Markedly.
But that was at the same period where basically after we went off the gold standard, right?
Right.
And so I wonder if, like, I've thought maybe
it's all tied together.
Maybe oil was a dollar sink in some way. Maybe the inflation's got to go somewhere. Let's have it go here, and it benefits our friends. I don't know.
Well, I get confused by inflation also. The fact that they're claiming inflation is 2%, 2.5%. Now I think it's up to like 3.8%. Nobody believes that. Those numbers are ridiculous. So a guy emailed me the other day and said, look, I have such and such a business. I keep track of all my expenses. The last 3 years, inflation's been averaging 9 to 11%.
That seems right. Intuitively,
seems about right. I go to the store and I buy shit and I go, I can't believe how expensive this is. The guys we have guys, these are leaves in my swimming pool problem. We have guys who put mulch on our garden, and we have a woman who cleans a house, and she just cranked up the rates 15%. and so it's the idea that inflation is tame is ridiculous.
Well, I mean, if you look at if you use traditional definition of inflation as money supply growth, I mean, it's going up faster than the rate of official inflation. What do you think about Kevin Warsh, his wanting to change the measure of inflation that the Fed uses?
Clarify that.
I can't remember what he called it, but it's it's a different standard of measurement of the core inflation numbers used by the Fed, and which the Fed doesn't use CPI either. They use something else, but Warsh's number would move it down to 2 now. It'd move it down to 2. So this hawkish idea with Warsh is sort of out the window if he's going to redefine the standard they use to measure inflation out of the get-go. So it cuts it almost in half.
So I at one point wrote about inflation in the context of the different inflation metrics. And I think I found something like 25 different measures of inflation. One where Rosenberg described why they calculate it the way they do, and it was really interesting because at some level it made sense. And he says they exclude the inflationary contributions that do not represent a reflection of the economy. Because he wants to know how the economy is doing. And so the price of X may not be reflecting the economy. Price of Y may, and so they go with Y. And I said, so okay, that's fine. That sounds good. But don't call it inflation. Call it something else, right?
Right.
And so if we really have inflation that's 4 or 5% higher, then it means we've been in a recession for years.
Right, exactly. I looked up this thing on Warsh, and it said he signaled he wants to change the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. The Fed has used core PCE, which excludes food and energy, as its benchmark since 2000. Warsh favors something called trimmed mean PCE, which removes the most extreme price movements. Yeah, it sounds like bullshit, doesn't it? So the trimmed mean PCE is currently 2.36%, while the core PCE is 3.2 right now.
I just watched Rick Santelli clip from 2023 on CNBC. And he said, if you look at what's happening, he said, I think in the next 10 years, interest rates will be 13 to 14%.
Doug has said the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't buy long bonds. The guys who buy long bonds thinking they're going to go down are really juggling dynamite, in my opinion.
I think so.
They might go down, but it'd be like shorting the market. I wouldn't do that either. I just get way out of the splash zone and say, look, one of the things that's absolutely true is the boomers are not playing enough defense. The boomers really.
You think?
Yeah, I do. I know it's a wild idea. Well, my wild idea is that Warsh actually is what he appeared to be, and that for 15 years now he's been talking about Fed policy being ridiculous, and he's been consistent. And the question is, was he lying the whole way, or have they brought in a guy to finally knock the Jenga tower over, which could cause the Deagle report to become true?
And certainly usher in the Great Reset. I mean, that's one way to do it.
Right. And so it's conceivable that Warsh is Volcker 2.0.
Well, I've heard you say that before, and I thought that's it makes a lot of sense, actually.
No one's saying it, though. That's what I don't understand. They're all saying, oh, it's, new boss, same as the old boss. I'm going, are you sure?
And this is
you're going to be betting your wealth on it. You're going to be betting your life on it.
Right, and no one's counting on that alternative at all. I mean, I have this weekly call also, and we all everyone expects that we're just going to attempt to print our way out of this further, and nobody is expecting or even considering the possibility that you could have what you're describing, where Warsh actually steps up and says, no, we're gonna fix this. So I think it's a contrarian. You got to be thinking about that as a possibility. I mean,
well, the other
isn't.
thing is if you had said, name the guy least likely to be appointed by Trump, it would have been Warsh.
Yeah. As if Trump would know himself personally. He's just relying on Scott Bessent, I'm sure, for that.
Well, except for the fact that if a chemist in Ithaca can figure out that Warsh is a hawk, then Trump's advisors ought to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, a very smart, well-informed chemist. Yeah,
who's still just riding the internet, right? I mean, it's still just shit on. It's AI slop, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's my model for why Warsh got appointed. So I think Iran has to destroy the global economy so that we don't do that ever again. And I think Warsh has to bring us down into the valley of death and have the balls to do it.
So that must mean you're fully invested in the S&P at this point.
That would be an overstatement. Yeah. But then again, the other thing is, I think, by the way, it seems pretty clear to me that the markets right now are fully supported. And I've never been a wildly enthusiastic person about the idea of the Feds jerking the markets directly. I think it's always possible, but I've always thought, no, I think they jerk them temporarily. Like, for example, when Bush gave a speech one day, Bush Jr., and the markets were tanking on the Chiron right below him giving a speech, I think someone said, never let that happen again. Don't do that. And so I think when there's an important speech, a Federal Reserve governor, major leader, the markets get some sort of support. Now, one of the ways you support it is once you condition Wall Street to say, look, these days are going to be supported, then you don't actually have to support it because it's like, we're in the huddle and say, everyone go long, right? And if you don't, you're going to miss it. So you got to go long. And now, I've been thinking about this gamma squeeze story, which gamma squeeze is really evil. Unlike a short squeeze, the gamma squeeze for the viewers is where the market's going up and people start buying call options to get a leveraged play in the market's going up. Now, Wall Street, who sells the call options, do not want to hold the other side of that bet, and so they buy shares of the companies to hedge their call options. And that drives the price up further. And so it's this virtuous cycle, but it's also like a Ponzi scheme where it just runs out of gas, supposedly. Now, if your call option, and that's what makes it so evil, it's not like a short squeeze where the price of the stock's been driven down by selling, and now it's regressing back. This is just the market's going up, and therefore it then starts spiraling upward. The gamma squeeze will end in tremendous tears if that's what's going on. Now, the Feds could be buying the call options, which forces all the banks to buy the shares.
Stock.
Yeah, and it strikes me a price insensitive buyer, right? One who doesn't care if they win or lose could easily do that. Now, Tony Greer yesterday, I think, showed a chart of the market, and it looks so engineered. It was this step function, just boom, 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 boom. It looked like someone was just hitting the buy button. And it's like at the bottoms when some major bank just starts buying in vast quantity, right, just to turn it around. So I think the Iran war, I think they put cement blocks underneath the market to protect it. Now, we know that doesn't work in the long run. Period. And if people think that that cash flow from the companies no longer matters, they don't realize that they're admitting that capitalism is now broken completely.
Right.
And so I'm optimistic capitalism isn't that broken. So I think at some point capitalism, the free market will find a way to price this shit correctly. And that's going to be holy hell because we have been off the reservation for decades now. And people don't know that because they always go to market year on Zero Hedge or something, and they show 4-year plots. They go, this is going to happen because the 4-year plot of the S&P shows this. I go, oh, give me a break. Just give me a break, right? It's just like watching a 2-year-old for 2 minutes and predicting what college he's going to go to. But I guess you do the marshmallow test.
Well, yeah. Well, supposedly, if that really works that way, I don't even know if that was real, actually. But the markets are. So you're saying basically you have to have a much longer time frame if you're going to evaluate the markets at all, and everything is.
Especially these markets, because the last 40 years have been a recency bias of unimaginable magnitude. And people say, well, no, they're new markets. I go, okay. So if you're going to value the markets at 2 or 3 times the historical valuation, then you have to project earnings to be 2 or 3 times smaller, right? Because if you're going to say, look, typical earnings are 7% a year by owning the S&P since 1870, well, then you have to look at the average valuation during that period as well. And for 110 years, it averaged 15, and now, the Cape averaged 15, now it's 42. So it's like buying a gas station that has a 2.5% return per year. It's not a good buy.
It's not. And then if you add the sovereign debt situation on top of it, and you have private equity and private debt, that seems bad, you know what I mean? Like it's this confluence of everything coming at one time.
Potential. Oh my God, yes. And once they start going, they're all going to go.
Yeah.
The metaphor that I've been using for the last couple of weeks is I've shown GIFs, I don't know how you pronounce them even, of the ping pong balls on the mousetraps, where you throw one ball in and they all start flying all over the place. It turns out Centelli in his 2023 rant about the interest rates made reference to the ping pong balls and the mousetraps. I'm going, oh, Rick, you are smarter than I thought.
He is a smart guy. Well, don't you think that the price action around the sovereign debt has already started to show that ping pong action beginning?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It seems like they've been able to put a lid on that, but they haven't been able to in the last 10 days.
Well, they put a lid on it by saying you're not getting your money, which reminds me of 07 and 08 when the credit default swaps were due, and they just said, we don't see a problem here.
Mm-hmm.
There's no default. You see a default? I don't see a default. So they just refused to pay the CDSs, and then they got bailed out. And so yes, I've been watching the Japanese bond market, wondering why there hasn't been an explosion due to the yen carry trade blowing the hell up. And both Steph, who I really trust, and Mike both said, oh, it's because of the weak yen. And I go, still got to blow up. I think it's still got to blow up somehow, somewhere. And Centelli said in his 2023, he made reference to the Japanese could blow the whole system up. So
I'm gonna have to go back and watch that.
I tweeted it. So okay, if you go to my Twitter feed, there's not too many tweets between the start and that. In fact, it might be one of the top 3 or 4 at this point. So the bond market's screaming at us, as you've implied.
Yeah, it seems. So, what percentage? You don't have to answer this if you don't want, but how much?
I'm happy to answer it. I lay it all out.
How much cash do you have? How much dry powder as a percentage of your portfolio?
If I consider cash anything that's a sort of fixed income and non-committed. So I have like TIAA, which I could be out of by this afternoon. I have 2-year treasuries. I have things like that, which you can't be out of immediately. But if we have a serious problem 2 years from now, the buying opportunity will just be starting. If it's there, right? It's not this idea of an 87 crash. That's so fictional. The guys who anchor on the 87 crash are missing the point. It's the fact that didn't become worse that's caused everyone to think they're invincible. The 87 crash is not the model. It's a terrible model.
Japan's the model?
Japan's a good model. Of course, it's not going to be a perfect model, but I think it's going to be. I think we're going to have multi-decade period of treading water. I think it's going to be uninvestable. I think it's going to be just mediocre as shit. And the boomers are going to have to start selling shit once and for all. And once we start selling shit, who's going to buy my house? My kids can't buy my house, and not that you sell your house to your kids, but it's a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
These are
not at these prices. They can't
not at these prices. And then the numbnuts who say, who all agree that we kept rates too low for too long, and to that I add too many times, are now all saying we have to drop the rates. And I go, you sound like a fucking retard.
They do.
You're a complete idiot, right? You just have admitted it doesn't work, and now you're saying to do it. And what they're trying to do is give the boomers a way to get out of their houses without losing money, and get out of their assets without losing money by selling them to a generation that can't afford them, but taking rates so low that they can fake it. And then they'll own the houses and the assets when the rates start going up, and they'll get fucked.
It's just another effort to kick the can down the road. I mean, that's all it is, right?
Yes.
Which,
yes.
I mean, that's worked out, I guess, okay so far. And,
for 40 years.
Yeah. So that's coming to an end one way or another. I don't think there's any way around it. The kicking the can.
Always does. Always does. It's like that lump in your breast, I'm pissing blood. Don't worry about it. That'll pass, right? Maybe not.
But these people are so they're so creative, though. I mean, did you think they'd be able to kick the can after 2008?
No.
No, I did not. In fact, that's how I blew 2008, is that I believe there was another halving, or what I would call the great halvening.
Yeah.
No, I thought that so in 2008 we got the historical average valuation. People don't know that. You look at 110 years before that. You look from 1870 to 1990. The great financial crisis got down to historical average valuation. We fell from space like a Red Bull stunt, but we never hit the ground. We never plumbed the bottom. But
right.
They were able to retrieve it with what, $30 trillion, right?
Right. And here's the thing, the biggest thing, like the one thing about they've kicked the can down the road, they've saved it. The truth is that they've destroyed the standard of living of the average American along the way. And so while we didn't have that moment of real recognition where the bottom really falls out and they just let the market pick up the pieces and build what they can, they've kicked the can down the road, but in doing that, it has destroyed almost everyone. So It has had that effect of destruction.
Yeah. Well, the younger generation can't afford a house. They can't afford to pay off their student loans. They can't afford the assets that they're forced to buy in theory to accrue wealth are way overpriced. So they can't possibly accrue wealth.
Yeah, and it's not just the younger people. There were fewer auto loans granted last year than there were 10 years ago. But the value of those loans is much higher. Because everyone
7-year loans.
People they have to roll they're underwater on their car at trade-in, so they're rolling that into the new loan. They have to do the extended term to make the monthly payment work. And so this is all this this is what kicking the can down the road looks like. The debt just gets bigger, the problem gets worse, the immiseration of the people gets far worse, but we can pretend that everything's okay because the S&P is up.
You could do buy now, pay later on DoorDash now.
On everything.
I know. They're not going to repossess your Kung Pao chicken. I was talking about the municipal debt problem, which apparently is catastrophic. A guy named Tom Seidel is an expert, and I brought this up with Melody last week, as you reminded me that's who we were talking with. And I cited a couple of examples. I had no details, and Melody had the details. And then there's some town, Conroy, Texas, she mentioned. It has something like 8,500 people and $2 billion in debt.
Wow.
Municipal debt. They built a lot of gymnasiums and a lot of parks and a lot of, I don't know what they did with it. They're building a data center in Lansing, New York, which is a small little burb that has a post office, but that's about it. And I've begged the town elders, who I know a couple of them, to not use Lansing money for infrastructure. So don't let them suck you into, we just need a road, we just need service, we need electrical. If you put in a couple of million, you'll get a lot of revenue out. And I said, second of all, don't spend a penny until it's in the bank. And don't let them leave you with an albatross hanging around your neck. Don't let them leave you with a toxic waste dump.
Are they listening to you?
They pretend to, but I don't believe them.
Mm.
I don't believe they're smart enough to avoid this because they're dealing with pros.
Right.
It's like the guys. It's like the guys who put wind. In Australia, they were putting wind farms on farmers' land, and the farmers would be paid, $12,000 a year or something for this wind farm. And the farmers didn't know that they were signing something saying that they were responsible for it.
So once it's time for decommissioning the thing, they have to take care of it?
Yep.
Ah.
Yep.
And
as I was telling you guys before we went live, I have a third of an acre building lot that I think it was about an $85,000 lot that I bought to protect my house from someone building on it. And I decided to sell it. And it got convoluted. And I asked the person who bought my house if they wanted to buy this lot. And they said, they offered, I think, $65K. And I was tempted. The realtor said, no, don't. We can get more. And I still was tempted because I thought the idea of having it proximate to the house is an old farmhouse. And then I just found out that because of some net zero policy, that lot can't hook up to the town's natural gas. So it's no longer a building lot. And then she starts babbling something about how, well, you could put something there like a trailer or something. I'm going, you know what that just did to the value of that lot? And I said, when did this happen? She said, oh, it just happened. I'm going, what am I paying you for? This is insane. So now I have basically a lot that might be worth so little that I should just stop paying the taxes and walk from it.
Well, I think the best answer is to sell it to the original plan, right? Those people
we went back to them, and they said, all we want to pay is $40 now.
Hmm.
Little hard to take the $25,000 haircut, just psychologically. One time I had a yard sale when I cleaned out a house I moved into, and some lady was trying to nickel and dime me down from 50 cents. And I said, I said something, and I said, I'd rather throw it in the trash than sell it to you for less than 50 cents. And then there was another one. The guy was a perv, it turns out, and he had scarves and stuff with reindeers humping and things like that. It was really, I sold some funny shit that day.
Well, all they can do is nickel and dime you when you're selling it for 50 cents.
Right. That's exactly right. That's right. Remember when I was a kid, there was a thing called the 5 and dime. Now it's the dollar store.
And it's not even $1 anymore.
No, it's not even $1 anymore. It's going to be the $20 store or whatever.
Yeah.
We're headed for trouble.
What do you guys say to say, people call me, probably call you guys the black pillars, the doomers, and and to me, there are solutions. It's just not what people want to hear. Like, there's not going to be a civil war against the government. Like, I don't see any of that. Maybe I'm wrong. That's
not a solution either. That's not a solution.
No, but I don't see it anyway. I just.
Well, what are the solutions, though?
I think you don't have any control over the macro, but you have tons of control over the micro. The things that are actually within your field of control, with your own household, your own preparation, your own. I live in Uruguay. I moved here during COVID because of what I thought was happening, and it seems to hold up true. We have a cattle ranch here. I can seeing a bunch of Angus outside of my window right now. We're off the grid in terms of with solar, and my kids are doing well. So like I feel like all the solutions I have are solutions that I've been working on personally, internally, that only I could affect. And I think you can still create a fantastic life regardless of what happens. And but if you're trying to change what things between Iran and Trump, or even thinking that voting might give you a solution there, I think that you're just wrong. It's not going to make any difference at all. But there's tons of shit you have so much control over, and just focusing on that is the right answer.
This gets back to my moment of the boomers aren't playing enough defense. They part of it's because they finally now have a portfolio that they think is enough. Turns out I think they're wrong. But they're counting on it now. They have to have it. They and someone once said, just because you need the returns doesn't mean you're going to get them.
Right. I think that's true. Yes, no doubt about that.
But it's hauntingly true. And here's a question I have, and I don't have a good answer for it. I have a almost religious level belief that as the boomers liquidate their assets later in life, that will necessarily require a repricing. Yeah. Well, one could make the argument that, let's say I died today, my kids would get a wad of money. And so in some sense, that me dying today would pass the wealth to that generation very efficiently.
Today it would, but I mean, as if ultimately there's a core demographic problem.
There is.
Like the housing issue is the best example of it. If your assets, your brokerage account, that's one thing. The cash you've got, the gold, that's fine. But the house, you're not going to be able to liquidate all of these houses at the current market price. There's no chance.
Mansions, and the interesting thing is not only do they not have the money to buy them, but they've been raised to not want them.
They don't want them.
They've been raised to have small footprints. And I for example, have antiques in my house, 18th century.
Those.
No one wants them. I can buy now an 18th century walnut desk for what I would consider to be less than the value of the walnut.
Yeah, people don't want this stuff. It's just the younger generation is not interested in that at all. That's for sure. Yeah. And I mean, my kids are actually, so I have a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they are shockingly not materialistic at all. In a way that certainly not, like I was oriented toward having stuff when I was their age, but they really they don't really care about material reality, like accumulating stuff, having a, nicer car or whatever. Like there's never even think.
Yeah, I'm not material. I can tell you my materialistic weakness. I'm a sucker for takeout. I do not use the private credit markets to buy takeout. But I do the math. It turns out if you make yourself, I made myself tacos last night for dinner. And if you do the math, I spent about as much on the ingredients as if I went to Chinese takeout. And so some of these Asian takeouts, they actually are pretty efficient at getting the ingredients and putting it together and not charging high added costs. And so in that sense, I've done the math. I said, okay, if you do takeout every day of the year, how much does it add up to? And I go, that's not enough to worry about. It's just not enough for me to worry about in my current state. Now, what I have here is this shirt. Everyone says, Dave, get a new shirt. I have a number of these, but they're all just polo shirts. I haven't worn dress pants more than, I probably have 2 pairs of dress pants of some kind, like Dockers. The rest are blue jeans and sweatpants. I have 2 pairs of sneakers. My car was a beater to the point that when it was finally time to go, a guy gave me $700 for it. Right, that's driving a car right into the dirt. And so I could live like a grad student with the exception of the takeout. And even in grad school, I used to go out and get lunch. from the local deli or something, right? In New York. And so my wife, on the other hand, she has grandchildren. There is no faster way to go bankrupt than to be married to a grandmother, because she can walk into a fucking AutoZone and come out with toys for the grandchildren.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how she finds them, but she comes out and I go, "You're not buying these for the grandchildren. You're buying them for you."
No, it's the same truth with your own kids. I was buying everything I've ever bought for my kids. Well, not everything. Most of it was stuff I wanted them to have. It wasn't like that they were saying, "Dad, on my Christmas list, can I have?" Yeah.
Right. But what was also true when I was a kid, my dad was a contractor and had actually a very successful contracting business, 350 employees, and 4-man ownership, but still, but at Christmas is when you got what you needed. So if you needed a new baseball glove, you asked for it for Christmas, that sort of thing. And you didn't just say, "Hey, Dad, I need a new glove," and just race off to the store that night and get a glove. That's not how it worked.
It's all changed. I mean, it's just the culture is so consumer oriented at this point. I mean, consumption is the thing. I know. It's the source of entertainment. It is. I mean, we're starved as consumers here in Uruguay. It's tough to be a consumer if you like it.
I've heard the shit falls apart the minute it comes out of the box.
I mean, if you're buying anything, you can get high quality stuff here, but it's all a pain in the ass. I mean, it's a pain in the ass to buy stuff.
So my son lived in Uruguay for 2 years, so so he got good at fixing shit.
Yeah, the Uruguayans are not exactly like the Cubans with the old cars, but more like the
1945 car, right, with the wheels made out of wood.
Matt, how will the shortages impact you in Uruguay?
Well, I mean, there's a state monopoly on oil here. It's really hard to understand all of the shortages, like because of the thousands of, products that are really produced from oil. Ultimately, I mean, packaging and everything. But with oil in particular, I checked it out. We get most of our oil actually from Nigeria, which I was surprised that we don't get it from Brazil or Argentina. Most of it comes from Nigeria, and we have there's a state-owned refinery that processes everything, all the diesel and all the gasoline here, all the they call it super gas. It's just like propane, also. But I suspect, if it comes down to bidding war for crude oil from Nigeria, Singapore is going to beat Uruguay. It's just going to beat it. So I just expect, and like a lot of people go, well, it'll just be more expensive, and I don't think it'll just be more expensive. I think that there will have to be rationing. At least I think in Uruguay, I think there will be rationing. I mean, I did buy an electric car the first 2 weeks after this happened because we needed another car anyway. So both the kids are here now, but so we need another car for the family's peace of mind. Let's put it that way. But I got an electric car because I was like, it's a nice prepper item too. I could kind of justify it to myself on those grounds. But I expect
you charge it on your solar panels? Can you charge it? Okay.
Yeah. So, but no, I expect that there's going to be real scarcity of things. I mean, I don't have to worry. You don't worry about food here as much. There's a lot of food here.
What do you think about the U.S.? What do you think about the U.S. since probably our audience is U.S. based?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's going to be. I think that certainly prices. I think we've only begun to see the price rises in diesel and gasoline and jet fuel. I think we've only. I mean, this is the market anticipating shortages or scarcity rather than experiencing scarcity. So I think the prices are going to go up. But I also, how complex the distribution system is. If it's not full, you will have places where it doesn't end up. So if you can't keep the same flow rate there, it will show up in weird places on the fuel side of things. But then you have weird things like with the sulfuric acid. And you can have, and the implications of that are really shocking. I mean, both for agriculture, but then also for mining. Some copper mines.
I didn't even know that. I'm a goddamn chemist, and I didn't even know the sulfuric acid story until I'm convinced that world crises are to teach Americans geography and economics.
We only learn anything, I think, through global crisis of some one form or another. So yeah, but that's pretty shocking the effect it has. Like some copper mines cannot produce copper without it. Other copper mines actually produce it as a byproduct. So it's like even from an investment standpoint, you really have to do a lot more work. You can't just trust on this macro thing because the supply chains are so complex, so optimized for efficiency that I don't think anyone can see the consequences of one thing being missing at any point in this very complex supply chain. So I think random things are just going to go missing from store shelves that you expected to be there, just gone. And when it's something fundamental like motor oil, it's a big problem. Some things you can substitute. Take a preference of another one, but other things you can't. One thing that's interesting is in Japan, they a lot of the packaging on their food products, they announced they were not going to be doing them colored anymore. They're just going to be gray, because apparently that requires less inputs of some kind for it. But so not a big deal, right? I mean, just the packaging just is not as colorful. But when I thought about that, I thought that sounded so dystopian, walking through a grocery store and having all the packaging gray. Yeah.
Look like the Soviet Union
exactly.
in 1988, right?
Exactly. So it's really difficult to know how it's going to affect things, but it's going to affect people. It's in shampoo, right? I mean, this will affect shampoo. It'll affect...
I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what would be a win is if we quit putting chintzy shit in packages that require a saber saw to get it out, right?
Yeah.
So the plastic packaging is appallingly excessive, and how many lobbies must be involved in that. But
it's all like anti-theft packaging on everything now.
And that's right. And we should be packaging much more shit in newspaper, whatever.
I think it's going to come to that. I think they're going to have to.
Right.
Two last things I want to ask you guys, and it's relatively quick. Dave, I know you, and I brought this up to you before. You were on a conversation with Simon Dixon in the whole financial industrial complex versus the military industrial complex. But I want to get Matt's take on what he thinks of that. And then I also want to ask you guys your thoughts on what Professor Zhang says out of China.
Well, they're narratives to start with. And I think that, and the great thing about any narrative is there are parts of it that ring totally true. That you can go, well, it's plausible. But it requires a lot of, I think you have to set aside the obvious flaws in it. When like the industrial complex and the financial complex, where's the line between those exactly? It's very hard for me to define that, and to see these as separate entities that are negotiating for something. It seems to me that they're hand in glove, that may even be the exact same thing.
Not to mention Silicon Valley.
Exactly. Yeah, and those are merging into the same thing. I mean, so I think that these are nice. They're nice. If Simon would run that, his narrative as a hypothesis, and I'd love to see him. He would know best try and disprove it, because he understands his theoretical framework really well, and he looks for evidence constantly that supports the idea. But there must be some evidence that doesn't, and it'd be a lot easier for me to buy into what he says if it were looking like not everything perfectly fit within the model.
Well, I've been trying to think of pairings for zero hedge debates, and the start of the pairing is always the person who has what seems to be a very firm narrative, and then the trick is to find the person who is ideal to do the opposite. Now, At one point, I got asked to moderate one of those things. I've done a bunch, but I got asked to moderate one, which was Israel-Palestine. And I
no thanks. I'm busy that night.
And I said no, but I'll tell you the guy you've got to get is Brett Weinstein. And I said you can tell him that I insisted he do it, and he ended up doing it. But the zero hedge debate format, the debate format, sometimes it becomes just a confirmation bias because everyone agrees. But I would love to pair up Tom Luongo with someone who really argues the opposite of London. I don't know. People who don't buy the London story don't bother to even argue about it is the problem. There's no anti-Londoners. They're just people who buy it and people who just say, I don't care. I don't think that's right. I realized that Steve Hanke would potentially be a good moderator. But from our podcast we did with Steve, a couple of them, he doesn't care. So he would be good because he's a currency expert and this and that, and so he could be processing in real time in the debate. But I can't think of someone who's an antagonist to the London model. Another one would be I'd love to see an AI debate. I don't know what to make of AI. One CEO said something really interesting. He said, look, they're asking for $1 trillion. Of course, they're going to come up with a really cool story. And I'm going, okay, that kind of says it all, right? But is the AI problem is a bubble, humongous bubble, a bubble within a sea of bubbles. So that's the real problem. This is the .com bubble, but surrounded by bubbles, and we don't know who's exposed, right? They say, oh, the banks aren't exposed. Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. And then the other problem is the AI coming in so quickly that it'll be like pouring hot water on ice cubes. It fractures as opposed to letting them warm gently. And so, when the cars showed up and buggy whip makers had to readjust, they had time.
Right.
And now we might not have time.
Yeah, did you see Citadel's comments recently? Was it Ken Griffin? Is that the guy?
It might have been the guy I was quoting about saying you have to make up a good story. It might have been Citadel's Griffin. Go ahead and say it.
Well, no, what he was saying was that he was shitting on the AI story 6-9 months ago.
Then it was Griffin, yeah.
But he said we have AI agents doing the work now of people that I pay 7 figures to would take them weeks or months of analysis to do, and this is doing in hours or days. Right. And so he was freaked out about the job loss effect of AI. So he kind of, just because he got to see it, they got these great Princeton grads, geniuses, working on this stuff for weeks, and then now they have AI agents doing the same thing in 24 hours.
The irony is the computer scientists can't get jobs.
No.
There's a paradox in that one. And so that could come on so quickly that the system breaks somehow, that something really goes wrong. And I've written about this before, about creative destruction. And one of the analogies I use is that, when you go from TV to Blockbuster Video to Netflix online, you have to get a certain amount of return out of your Blockbuster investment, or it ends up being just terrible waste of money, right? So a Blockbuster is gazillions of bucks and it only lasts 5 years. Then it's an inefficient system. The creative destruction has too much destruction to it. It means that they're rolling out too many generations too quickly. And which, by the way, I think is what AI is going to do in spades. Is the generation are going to come at you, and it's going to have, each of these very expensive generations is going to have the life expectancy of a souffle. And so I said, look, if you don't think too fast is a problem, just bulldoze your house every 5 years and build a better one.
Right.
And tell me how that works out for you. And so, big concern of mine is that things are happening too quickly, and we're going to have it's like a NASCAR race. We're going to have a pile up.
It seems inevitable, honestly. I don't see how that doesn't work out that way. Yeah, and I think young people are very concerned about this too. I saw two recent speeches that were given in front of college students. What do you call them when I guess they're graduating or whatever?
Commencement.
And,
They booed.
Mm-hmm.
They booed.
They booed when the speaker mentioned AI. They booed. Mm-hmm. And I think as people understand, like, it hasn't been sufficiently explained what the upside is, but everyone can now see the downside.
Well, then there's the I think colleges are in great risk, and I'm speaking to the high priest of alternative models to a college education, which I've told many people about.
I love that name, Dave. I love that for you, Matt. You're the high priest of alternative education.
Yeah. But there's this meme that clicked for me so well, where a father's sitting there with his daughter, and he says, "I'm so glad you're married in sociology. You're majoring in sociology because they just built a sociology plant downtown." and it really catches the spirit. Cornell has more majors than probably any school in the country, but at some point, many of those, if not the majority, will be of no value. And you have figured this out in a pioneering way. You're trying to.
Yeah, my son's doing a good job of it.
But I've been thinking about the doing something for 3 months over a course of 4 years. And I go, that's 4 times 4, that's 16 different experiences. I've been thinking about being an employer, going, this is like, Deion Sanders showing up and saying, look, recruit them. We'll figure out what position to put them in later, right? So you recruit the athlete, not the position, right?
Yeah.
And your son is going to be the athlete.
Where hopefully he will not want to work for anybody, and he'll do his own thing. Is my hope ultimately, is that he has enough. Because, well, as an entrepreneur myself, I just feel like it. I mean, it obviously can work out worst, but being an employee is tough. You're totally dependent upon pleasing the boss, and sometimes your field collapses on itself, as we're seeing with this AI stuff. So right. I hope he just do his own thing instead.
And if someone says, my kid's going to college, what should they major? I don't have a good answer for them, because I can't imagine where anything will be in 10 years. It's just moving too quickly for me to mentally keep up.
I just think the most important thing is that you not go into debt on a hypothesis about the future.
Right.
That's what's important. Now, if you can go to college and you can pay for it, that's one thing. But when most of the kids leave with some debt, and then that double fucks them. They're unprepared for the future, and now they're behind the 8 ball in a big way that really limits the options they have for what they can do next.
Well, you've seen, presumably, me rant about how the college debt looks like it was used to liquefy the banking system. So if you boot up a plot of college debt in a long time scale, it's going along in a fairly gentle slope, and then in 2008 it takes off. And I'm going, that seems awfully coincidental that student debt took off in 2008 to get to $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion of student debt. Is it possible they used it to liquefy the banking system?
Sinister, especially because Bush, before that, made it so that you could never
pay it off.
Have the debt expunged. Yeah.
Oh, advice to parents: never co-sign a student loan, unless you can co-sign a student loan, provided you've read all the fine print. You understand that there's no traps in it. I would really worry about the traps, like, oh, by the way, you can't pay it off early, and oh, by the way, it'll balloon, and right? There's a lot of ways you can be trapped, and that you could pay the whole thing off. And then I'd say, okay, if they're going to give you low interest loan, then one thing you do not want to look like when your kids are applying to college, if they go to college, you don't want to look rich. if you want to get financial aid. So, for example, these student savings programs, these programs where you dump money into the students, under the student's name, those are a disaster, in my opinion, because when a financial aid office looks at those, they go, 100% of that is ours. So we take that. And they say, okay, there's another 150,000 we got to account for. And it turns out with the parents, they look at income, various things. They don't look at retirement accounts. They don't look at the value of your house. And so you want to look poor. In fact, I've thought about the fact, let's say my son wants to send his kids to college. He should potentially use the maximum gifting capabilities to give me money so that he's got none in the bank.
Yeah.
So his kids will get financial aid, and then I pay off any costs that they need paid for. But you want to look broke.
Any system that requires shenanigans like this is super fucked. You know, that needs to be gamed in order to survive it. Like, there's a problem.
There is a problem. And college became too expensive to not take this seriously. So parents don't want to tell their kid where to go. Like, for example, a friend of mine visited, and his daughter's looking at University of Colorado and Cornell. And she ended up going to Colorado. Now, my guess is it probably costs not far from the same price because they don't live in Colorado. And what I told him is, I said, what you don't underestimate is that you're influenced by your peers. And at Colorado, her peer group is not going to be up to the same standard. One of the reasons you're successful in a place like Princeton and Harvard and stuff is because, well, recruiters go there and stuff like that. But
the peer group.
But also, the peer group is huge, right? You want to be surrounded with serious players. And if you go to Florida State, my guess is that you will want to, if the lesson to be learned will be going to organ transplant, because liver transplants will be important for that crowd.
Right.
Right. But
yeah.
there will be hot chicks. That's the good news. You want to meet babes. My guess is Florida State would be the place to be.
College is such a disaster at this point. I think, I think it's a good time for a gap year, if nothing else.
Or two.
Yeah, just to do something. Have them get a job, do something, just experience the world a little bit, get confronted with reality a little bit before taking on debt. I think that's the most important thing.
So that you know why you're doing it.
Right, and you're going into it with the right attitude too, instead of just going to have the college experience.
Right.
Which maybe at one time that was inexpensive thing to do, but now I think it's so expensive. And I also think, my basic thing is college is very expensive, and it's probably not worthwhile for most people. But I think even worse than that, and I'd say this certainly in my son's case, the idea of college, when you don't really know what you really want to do, you're basically taking somebody who is full of piss and vinegar, lots of energy. I mean, unlimited energy, if you remember back being 18, like literally unlimited energy, and you're more or less putting them on ice for 4 years. Where 12 credit hours a week is considered full time, and you're going to be in this contained aquarium. And when like my son has done so much in the last 2.5 years, I mean, what he's accomplished would be pretty shocking to somebody who just did the same time in college.
Right. No, I agree. And
what about?
I think some number of years from now, there'll be half the number of colleges and half the number of majors. And as I like to say, some majors should be history.
What about the female version of that, Matt? I mean, you have a daughter.
Yeah, she's, girls are hard. So she doesn't want to do exactly what her brother is doing. So so we're figuring it out along the way. I mean, she did go to a home building school in Vermont.
I did one of those as a young adult. It was really useful. 14 days we framed up and we roofed and we wired and it was 14 days, 14 hours a day, and it was profoundly useful in adulthood.
Yeah, and this is a kind of experience maybe you would have gotten growing up a long time ago, but I don't know. But certainly it was I didn't get growing up and would have liked to have had. And so hers was a total of a month, and 2 weeks of it was the stuff you're talking about, and there was 2 weeks of design. So how to design a structure, basically just So she came back with some plans for remodeling one of the buildings we have here on the farm, which are actually amazing. So it was a great experience for her. She's scheduled to go to Florence later this year and do a month in this Italian cooking school. So
she is kind of doing what your sons did. She's just doing the chick version.
Yeah, and whether or not she'll want to keep that pace of every 3 months, I don't know. And if you try and push your kids into anything, you know how that works. So you kind of maybe can try and you can kind of coax them and make a suggestion, but after that, it's like you got to let them do their thing. And so how this translates into a female version of the preparation, I'm not sure. But I do know, I can say there are lots of girls that are doing exactly what's in the book, even though it was written for boys. There are lots of girls that are doing it.
Okay. You must be getting feedback too. You must be getting all sorts of feedback from it.
I've gotten some great
feedback. Your email box must be bananas sometimes.
Sometimes it is. And I mean, yeah, a lot of it's pretty humbling, honestly, when you hear some of the good stories from it. And the way I just got a note the other day from a guy who's a public school teacher, and that he's talked about it in his classes and bought copies for many of his students. It's pretty amazing. When you write something, you have no idea how it's gonna, if it will have any reader at all.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe you never worried about that because you
so much. I worry about it now. We sent my son to Outward Bound, which was really good, and so something like that. And part of it, they strand you on an island towards the end, and you're given an 8x8 tarp, and they don't let you have a knife because too many kids were bored and slicing themselves up, and they would check on you each day to make sure you were had all your thumbs and the eyes and everything. But you're given a diary and you're supposed to write to it. And for my son, it rained nonstop, and he just sat there in this miserable, wretched experience, pondering the meaning of life. And he came out of it different.
And the great thing about those really hard experiences, really unpleasant, is you look back on them very fondly. Right. Miserable, but like the worst parts of it all fade away, and you end up being the great stories you tell people. They're the like fun things to talk about. So more of those things is good. Actually, Max is doing a 2-week outdoor survival school with Boulder Outdoor Survival in like 2 weeks from now. So
interesting. And yeah, it's like someone said. Grant Williams had a phrase. It was about banking. He said, we take your money. We take your money. I'm never going to replicate it, but it's not like we take your money to give you an experience. That's the essence of it. It was really funny. Yeah, I think there are bad things that you don't look back. I think probably someone who went through a divorce doesn't look back fondly at the pain and suffering of that, things like that. So, but there's
I'm divorced. I look back; it worked out okay, and we it wasn't. I mean, it was handled well by us. I think we had a mediated divorce
by the standards of divorce, right?
Of course, it was pretty good. Yeah, and the family survived. Let's put it that way. So that's what counts.
Well, that's good. I've never been through one, so I do occasionally refer to my wife as my first wife, but we're on our 40th anniversary, so I don't think she finds it as funny as I do.
No, I doubt she finds a lot of things funny.
And as you guys know, she's really sick for the last 10 days, and my dog had diabetes, and I've made a number of jokes about instead of putting down the dog, we're going to put down my wife, and things like that, and she... she
doesn't find that funny. She doesn't find that funny.
It makes me happy.
So, well, we hit over the 2-hour mark.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
Well,
we solved no problems.
No, but we laughed a lot.
Them.
We laughed a lot, though, and that's
good
important.
Confirmation bias. Yeah. Our narratives are stronger now.
Stronger, reinforced.
Reinforced narratives. Yeah, I would like to urge people to read you should find a way to post on this thing the narratives. When Mike posts it on Twitter, you should underneath it put your narrative article. I think that would be constructive.
I'll put it on the show. I'll put it in the show notes too.
Right.
Cool. Well, I've got some added to my reading list, so I've got some work to do. Thank you for the homework, Professor.
Exactly.
I called him Doctor when we were on the conversation with Steve Hankey, or I called him Professor, Professor Steve, and I said Professor Dave. I go, that's the first time I've ever called you that. And Dave goes, yeah, that'll be the last.
Steve and I get along in this funny. We're really opposites in many ways, but we're kind of a Mutt and Jeff pair.
It's a great. You and Bob Moriarty is really. It's very entertaining too.
Bob's funnier than shit.
He is hilarious.
He wants to do a show with you, Matt. He wants to do a show with you, Matt.
I'm not sure I can handle his quizzes.
Yeah, well, that's why I want you to come on. That's why I want you to come on. You could take
Bob out of the pressure. I'm going to mess it up. I can't.
Give me the fucking answer, Bob.
That's why you want. That's why I want you to come on. You can take the quizzes for me. That's why I said to Dave. I go, Dave, you answer these. I get too much pressure on these quizzes.
Bob will send me an email asking for something, and I'll say, well, I've been really busy. I'll try to get to it. And then he'll respond. He'll say, I hate it when you whine. And at one point, we're doing something, and he said, try not to fuck up the next one. There's really there's a funny ass brutality to his delivery. Yeah, he's like if Don Rickles or something. It's Bob's funny. I feel bad for a more minor podcaster who tried to tee up Bob and I to do a podcast together, and I had to cancel, but I didn't know Bob was on it. I might have flipped the cancellation another way, and they said, oh yeah, Bob was on. I go, oh shit, you really should have told me. I might have found a way to work around it. So yeah, I like Bob.
Where can people find you, Dave?
Under my desk, in the bedroom, swapping buckets for my wife, and on Twitter, building my narrative.
Matt, you know what to do.
Best place is crisisinvesting.com. That's Doug and I have a newsletter on resources there, and there's a free, and then there's the paid one. And I'm on Twitter too, but I'm not as active on that as either of these guys are. But that's just at Mattpheus, Mattpheus.
Where are you putting your investment money, by the way, before I let you go? Where are you storing your money? You asked me, but I didn't ask you.
I mean, I'm big into resources. Influenced by
resource equities?
Yes, equities, definitely. So,
big cap oil?
I do own some oil services now, but which I did not own before February, honestly, which have done well. But no, most of it is just mining stocks. Yeah, copper, gold, that kind of thing.
Rio Tinto?
Yeah,
Rio Tinto?
Oops, my camera went out. I do not own Rio Tinto.
Okay.
This is
done company. Well. I've been thinking about the sulfuric acid. Yeah, right. I kind of like big caps because they're less narrative driven.
Yeah, it's just with Doug's influence with
I know.
Doug wants the penny stocks is what he really likes, so I get him to cross that line a little bit to larger things, but
that's outside my skill set.
I have a lot larger portion of my portfolio in cash than I've had in the last. Well, I can't remember the last time I had this much cash in my portfolio, waiting for some.
I think cash may be my biggest position, and my gold position is pretty big. So for cash to be bigger, they're both somewhere in the 35 to 40 zone.
Yeah, I'm like 40% cash, not including obviously my gold in that either. So risky times.
Guys,
times. Yep.
I appreciate this. And
Adios.
those who are watching, I put all these conversations up early, ad-free on my Substack. So if you like what I'm doing and want to support my work, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. For those that are going to watch on YouTube, Rumble, listen on Apple, Spotify, like it, share it, comment. I do read all the comments. And, I thank you both for coming back on.
Despite how appalling they are.
Mic drop.